Panther's Claw, the first stage in the operation to secure part of Helmand province, was last week hailed a success. But according to a group of MPs, Britain's role in Afghanistan has become unfocused. The Foreign Affairs Committee thinks the UK has lost its way. It says after going into Afghanistan in 2001 to support US forces fighting terrorism, the mission has become sidetracked, putting efforts into the war on drugs, protection of human rights and the counterinsurgency.
So many of the goals that the international community has had for human rights, for education, for governance, cannot be achieved when there is a sense of insecurity. Security is the key, and therefore the international community has to focus on that.
The report also found that unrealistic planning at senior levels and between Whitehall departments had undermined Britain's mission in the country. The committee points out that after the United States, Britain has taken the lion's share of fighting in Afghanistan. It urges other NATO countries to share more of the burden.
Frankly, as an alliance, it's not working terribly well. It's basically the Americans and one or two other countries, ourselves, the Danes, the Canadians, all taking casualties, but most of NATO wanting to receive the security of belonging to NATO, but not really being prepared to contribute.
With British soldiers dying on a weekly basis in the country, public support for the war in Afghanistan is waning. But the Foreign Affairs Committee agreed there was no question of the international community abandoning the country. They urged the government to ensure that the armed forces have the right resources for the job ahead of them and welcome the surge in US troops and additional equipment in Helmand. The report says Britain should be seen to be strong in its commitment to Afghanistan and in its will to outlast the insurgency, for however long that may take. Jane Secker, Sky News.
Let's get the reaction now of the Shadow Foreign Secretary, William Hague, who joins us from Darlington. Good morning to you, Mr Hague.
Good morning.
In terms of who's to blame for this, is it the civil servants or is it the politicians?
Oh, I think ministers always have to take responsibility. There's no point blaming the civil servants. Politicians are there to take decisions. And I think this is a good report and a real wake-up call to the government. And I think it's right to talk about mission creep and to criticise poor coordination in Whitehall departments. It's also right to say that other NATO countries should be doing more and that we've got to be committed to success in Afghanistan, because if our opponents there don't think we are committed to success, then it will become impossible to succeed. So I think it's a very sensible report.
Is one of the problems that it appears to have fallen in between the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence in terms of what they were trying to achieve originally?
Yes, not only between those two departments, but also the Department for International Development as well. And I think this just underlines the case for what we've been calling for from the Conservative side of the House, which is for regular quarterly reports. Every 3 months we think ministers should come to the House of Commons and say, these are our objectives in Afghanistan, these are the resources we've got to achieve them, and this is how we're getting on with the objectives we gave you 3 months ago. And we think that if that happened, then the whole nation would be clearer about what we're doing, and Parliament would be clearer about whether there are sufficient resources for our troops to do the job in front of them. And we also need some clear ministerial responsibility. Who's in charge of the war in the cabinet? It's often unclear which minister really feels ownership of this problem, rather than different ministers who are not always well coordinated with each other.
Well, we remember John Reid's comment, of course, when he was out there, that it was all about reconstruction. We hope that will be achieved without a bullet being fired. Was there perhaps a failing by the military to warn the politicians that the Taliban was still there and still prepared to fight?
I don't know about a failure by the military in that respect. I imagine that there wasn't sufficient intelligence about the capabilities of the Taliban, but intelligence in Afghanistan, we have to admit, is a very difficult thing. The challenge, of course, once it became clear the situation was much more difficult than originally envisaged, was then to make sure that our troops had the necessary equipment. It's been clear for years that they haven't had enough helicopters, and again, we've been making that clear from our side of the House, and that should have been rectified by now. So I think there are some good, clear recommendations from this report. Our troops need to be properly equipped, the Afghan army needs building up and training more effectively, and the coordination of the reconstruction effort going in behind the military effort needs to be more effective.